Yeah, if there's ever a video that warranted smoking a pipe during it, I think it's probably this one. Since I've just been reading on the Guardian website, new articles recently posted on Google News also, and I like that this is being reported in the Guardian, that, so mainstream of leftist papers, and it's now saying, that the White House has deep concerns. The White House has deep concerns over China role in WHO COVID-19 report. Subtitles: Biden administration requests data from early days of outbreak, as of course they ought to be doing, I feel. Report must be free from alteration by the Chinese government. Good stuff. The White House on Saturday called on China to make available data from the earliest days of the COVID-19 outbreak, saying it had deep concerns about the way findings of the World Health Organization's COVID-19 report were communicated. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said in a statement it was imperative that the report be independent and free from alteration by the Chinese government, echoing concerns raised by the administration of Donald Trump, who moved to quit the WHO over the issue. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus on Friday said all hypotheses are still open about the origins of COVID-19, after Washington said it wanted to review data from a WHO-led mission to China, where the virus first emerged. Now, this WHO-led mission to China, this is what I reported on the other day, from this sort of conflicting reports put in the Independent and in the BBC. But on the one hand, you have the Independent asserting all this evidence supplied by this WHO joint Chinese venture between the WHO and the Chinese government report on COVID, a year after the fact or so, and the reports in the BBC, which were a little different, stressing the lack of evidence. So the WHO-led missions, which spent 4 weeks in China looking into the origins of COVID-19, of the COVID-19 outbreak, said this week that it was not looking further into the question of whether the virus escaped from a lab, which it considered highly unlikely. The Trump administration said it suspected the virus may have escaped from a Chinese lab, which Beijing strongly denies. Sullivan noted that President Joe Biden had quickly reversed the decision to disengage from the WHO, but said it was imperative to protect the organization's credibility. Re-engaging the WHO also means holding it to the highest standards, Sullivan said. We have deep concerns about the way in which the early findings of the COVID-19 investigation were communicated, and questions about the process used to reach them. Biden, who was spending his first weekend of the Camp David presidential retreat in the mountains of western Maryland, would meet his national security advisors on Saturday, a White House official said. Right. So this is what this guy says, what this WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus on Friday said, all hypotheses are still open about the origins of COVID-19, which is a little bit of a turnaround from what they initially said about chances of it escaping from the lab are very unlikely or highly unlikely. Okay, so they've stressed a high lack of likelihood that it did escape from that lab which was studying bat coronaviruses. And yet in this, on Friday, i.e. the day before yesterday, was saying that it's highly unlikely it emerged from the lab. Now, in light of pressure from the White House, they're saying all hypotheses are still open. So 1 minute the WHO is being the mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, the next minute is bowing to pressure from the United States government. So they're sort of, what are they doing? They're flim-flamming between diametrically opposed parties of interest. What I suspect is renewed interest in holding China to account in the investigative procedures surrounding the origins of COVID is really, first of all, what the American government ought to be doing anyway. Secondly, I think it may be a way of disentangling the Biden administration from any culpability so far as COVID's concerned, if you see what I mean. And it may be a sort of another move on two fronts. But then again, I'm going to speculate about the extent to which it was a sort of joint Trump-Biden venture, or if Biden sort of, or the double agents working for Biden within the Trump regime managed to sort of trick Trump into doing this, to discredit Trump, while simultaneously initiating the Great Reset and making loads of money that way. It also serves Boris's interests across the pond. Trudeau's in the mix. A lot of stuff lines up with it. And like China lying about it. Where does that fit in though? I don't see China releasing it deliberately. But then again, if they are sort of, being a paranoid totalitarian state, which they largely seem to be, let's face it, and are just sort of covering up anything that goes wrong in their country, and disentangling themselves from culpability so far as this is concerned. Maybe I see them doing that. I'm not sure I do though. Maybe I do. But there's just like saying nothing went wrong. It wasn't the lab. Well, at one point it occurred in the same city as that lab. That wet market does not sell pangolins or bats. It could have only come from a zoonotic source in the north of China where there are horseshoe bats. Yet there's been no zoonotic transmissions up there from horseshoe bats to humans, which is a little strange. So we have to sort of consider, or really take a few leaps of logic, really quite a few big leaps of logic, to suggest that this came from a natural zoonotic source as opposed to an anthropic zoonotic source, i.e. the zoonotic source of a bat or a pangolin in that Wuhan lab. And then there's considerations related to the fact that this outbreak is very much unlike SARS and MERS, since they've got history dealing with epidemics, but this is a pandemic. I think, some sort of accidental release of something from a lab may explain SARS and MERS. It may even have arisen zoonotically, naturally. However, if it did, I'm tempted to say or suggest that out of the 7 million or 3.5 million on average zoonotic transmissions of coronaviruses from bats in Southeast Asia, that at least a few more of them would be SARS and MERS, wouldn't they? Or wouldn't they? I don't know. And that these scary newer viruses may well be bioweapons, I think, being developed by the Chinese. And that seems to be a more rational explanation for it. And then I read that Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi communities seem to be far more susceptible to the virus than whites, and certainly the Chinese, who are the least susceptible to that. And I'm thinking that, well, that has the hallmarks of a bioweapon. That seems to be something that they're keeping in the mix in case, in the India-Pakistan conflict, for instance, really does push us a few seconds to midnight. For example, it seems like it's about to kick off any moment. Just throw some COVID over the border, or flock Indian cities with it, and Pakistani cities, and that'll sort of distract them long enough, and maybe draw the emphasis more towards China as opposed to the mutual animosity between India and Pakistan. It might diffuse the tension somehow. Maybe something like that. Or maybe it's more to do with their own border conflicts with India over the course of their history, and the Tibet issue and that sort of thing. But again, and considering the ties with the West, this COVID outbreak seems to have more of the hallmarks of Western intervention. And it does line up with the election of Boris. It does, to some extent, also line up with the election of Biden. It does produce a stock market crash. It does produce a recession. Then the market does recover. And then there's the pharmaceutical interests. And then there's the Great Reset and sustainability, and those sorts of enterprises and businesses. And now they're saying in The Guardian that the White House is raising concerns about stuff, about reports coming from China, as they really rightly ought to have been doing, frankly, before this point, far earlier than this. And this sort of seem to be, or the political left more, I think seems to be corroborating the stories being put out by the Chinese Communist Party until this point. And so the officials of anti-conspiracy flavour of the rhetoric is very much leaning towards, a natural zoonotic source as the cause of COVID, which I think is highly unlikely. And, all this sort of, sort of radical leftist, more sanitise opinion, deplatform or censor anybody who suggests it may have been conspiratorial in nature, deny the existence of any conspiracy. Obviously, entice an attitude in people or inculcate an attitude which seeks to suggest that conspiracies never happen. That we do just live in an airy-fairy world without corruption, with perfect leaders and all this crap. But I like this. I like that this is in The Guardian. It makes it more real, but it does make it possibly not as immediate as it should have been. And it does suggest sort of that this is coming out really very much after the fact, and at this point maybe no one really cares that much anymore about where it came from. I think a lot of people really come to sort of the same conclusion. Did it come from that lab? Yeah, I think it almost certainly did, I think. There's a very high likelihood that it did, and that's been consistently downplayed. Until it seems just now, when this Director General of the WHO, Tedros Ghebreyesus, is saying, just doing this turnaround saying, all hypotheses are still open. Okay, right. That's more like it then. And that in itself implies an attitude that seeks to undermine or go back on the initial findings of the WHO-led report, taken in conjunction with representatives of the Chinese Communist Party, and Chinese have, at every stage of this, refused an independent investigation, and that alone speaks volumes about this, I think. And really tried to slow the WHO down at every point, and this investigation happened back in January, so it was in excess of a year after the release of COVID, and that again speaks volumes. So thank you for watching. That's all I have to say for the time being, and I'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye bye.